The prophecy speaks of this night.
He knows you are the chosen one. What?
You look beautiful in the firelight.
And you, my love, are as strong as the shadows you cast.
The spirits have woven our fates together. Have faith, my love, for tomorrow holds the promise of a new beginning for our people.
The morning sun filtered softly through the curtains, painting the room in shades of gold and amber. Amara sat by her kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea, staring at the quiet street outside. Her apartment was modest, but every corner bore the marks of her care. Books neatly stacked on the shelves, framed photos of family and friends, a small plant thriving on the windowsill. She had built this life carefully, piece by piece, always mindful of the past that had tried to hold her down. Her independence was a shield, born from years of learning to rely on herself. The scars of previous relationships still lingered, invisible but persistent, like faint shadows behind her confident smile. Yet, she carried on with a quiet determination, balancing work, personal ambitions, and the small joys that made her life hers. She dreamed of stability, love, and a partnership built on honesty, but the memory of betrayal kept her cautious, always alert. It was during one of her rare moments of quiet that Kieran appeared in her life, a man who seemed ordinary at first glance, yet carried a presence that was quietly magnetic. He had a gentle smile, the kind that hinted at kindness without demanding attention, and eyes that flickered with unspoken thoughts. There was warmth in his gestures, a subtle attentiveness that made Amara feel seen in ways she hadn't in years. Yet there was something enigmatic about him, a careful hesitation behind his words that hinted at secrets he wasn't ready to share. Their first meetings were small and unremarkable, coffee shared in a sunlit cafe, casual laughter over shared jokes, lingering glances that held a promise of something more. But slowly these moments became threads weaving them together. Kieran would send her texts that made her smile mid-afternoon, bring her favorite flowers unannounced, or remember the smallest details of conversations she barely noticed. In return, Amara began to let herself laugh more freely, to feel the warmth of connection after so long in solitude. As days turned into weeks, their relationship blossomed quietly. They spoke of dreams and fears in the hushed intimacy of evening walks, of music that moved them and books that left marks on their hearts. Amara found herself sharing fragments of her life she had hidden for years, the hopes she nurtured, the doubts that haunted her, the parts of herself she had always protected. In Kieran's presence, vulnerability felt safe, and for the first time in a long while, her heart began to open. Yet even in these tender moments, there were subtle signs that all was not as it seemed. A question he skillfully dodged, a conversation he ended abruptly, a fleeting shadow of tension in his eyes, small details that Amara brushed off with reason and hope. She wanted to trust, wanted to believe in the goodness she saw, but deep down, a part of her whispered caution. The heart learns slowly, intuition often speaks softly. One evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the city lights blink alive in the night, Kieran laughed at a story she told, his hand brushing hers lightly. It was an ordinary moment, yet it held the extraordinary power of connection. Amara's chest felt light, her mind almost at peace, but a faint unease lingered at the edges, like the distant hum of a storm yet to arrive. She felt it, but she ignored it. After all, the world seemed right when she was with him, and maybe, just maybe, this time love could be simple. But love, as she would soon learn, is rarely simple. It carries weight, and sometimes the heaviest burdens are hidden beneath smiles and tender touches. The moments before the storm are quiet, almost comforting, until the first drop of truth falls and everything shifts. And though Amara did not know it yet, the day was coming when a secret would be revealed, one that would shake the foundation of everything she had started to trust. For now, though, the calm lingered. She sipped her tea, breathed in the soft air, and let herself imagine a future with laughter, warmth, and companionship. She let herself hope. And in that fragile hope, the story began, quiet, gentle, but charged with the tension of an approaching revelation that would demand more courage than she had ever summoned before. The evening had fallen with a quiet, almost deceptive calm. Amara sat on her living room sofa, the soft hum of the city outside providing a lullaby she could almost relax to. Kieran had promised to come by, and she felt that familiar flutter in her chest, part excitement, part nervous anticipation. Over the past weeks, he had become her anchor in ways she hadn't anticipated. His presence was soothing, almost grounding, and she allowed herself to believe that the past betrayals and heartbreaks might finally fade into memory. When Kieran arrived, he was unusually quiet, his smile faint, almost strained. He held a small gift bag in his hand, but it felt almost incidental, like an afterthought. "Hey," he said softly, settling beside her on the couch. The warmth of his hand brushing against hers gave her comfort, yet a subtle tension hung in the air. Something had shifted, she couldn't yet put her finger on it. They talked for a few minutes about mundane things, the chatter of everyday life, a story from work, a note about a neighbor's cat, but the silence between words grew heavier with each passing moment. Amara felt it first as a prickling at the base of her neck, then as a tightening in her chest. There was a pause and Kieran's gaze fell to the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, hesitant, but steady in a way that made her uneasy. "I need to tell you something," he said, his eyes meeting hers for just a moment before flicking away. "Something important. Something I should have told you earlier." Amara's heart skipped a beat. She felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension, the tension in her stomach twisting tighter. "What is it?" she asked, her voice calm, though her pulse had already begun to race. He took a deep breath. "It's about me. About my life before we met." His words were careful, measured, like a man trying to step across thin ice without breaking through. Amara nodded, urging him silently to continue. Kieran's confession came slowly, like the unraveling of a tightly wound thread. He revealed a past he had hidden, associations and choices that painted him in shadows she hadn't imagined. At first, the details seemed distant, almost abstract, but as he spoke, the weight of what he was telling her sank in. The person she had laughed with, walked with, and trusted so completely had a life, one he had carefully hidden, that was complicated and perhaps dangerous. Amara felt a cold wave of disbelief. Her mind raced, struggling to reconcile the man she knew with the man Kieran claimed to have been. Memories of their shared moments played across her mind, each smile, each gentle touch, now tinged with uncertainty. Could she have been naive? Had she ignored the signs? The questions came faster than she could answer them. Fear rose like a tide, pushing at the edges of her courage. Betrayal stung sharply, but there was also sadness, grief for the trust she had given so freely, for the love she had allowed herself to feel, and for the future she had imagined. She felt almost trapped between her heart and her mind, the part of her that wanted to reach out, to believe in him, and the part of her that screamed to run, to protect herself from a danger she could barely understand. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay composed. It wasn't anger alone, it was a mix of confusion, hurt, and disbelief. I didn't know how," Kieran admitted. I wanted to tell you, I really did, but I was afraid. Afraid that you'd leave, afraid that knowing the truth would change how you see me." His hands reached for hers, but Amara instinctively pulled back, the warmth of his touch now tinged with caution. Her mind replayed moments she had brushed off as insignificant, the fleeting hesitation in his eyes, the small omissions in stories he told, the times he had avoided certain questions. All those little things suddenly clicked into place, forming a mosaic of half-truths and hidden fears. She realized how much of him had been carefully constructed for her benefit, how much she had wanted to believe in the goodness she saw. Memories came unbidden, late nights alone, wondering why she felt restless, afternoons where her intuition whispered a warning she had silenced, the countless small instincts she had overridden in favor of hope. The secret was no longer just a piece of information, it was a fracture running through the foundation of her life, threatening to topple the reality she had carefully built around herself. As Kieran continued, the reality of his past pressed heavier. There were hints of danger, of people and circumstances from which he could not easily detach. Amara felt the weight of unspoken consequences bearing down on her. Could she trust him fully now? Could she trust her own judgment? The air between them grew thick, almost suffocating, and Amara realized that this was a turning point, one that could define everything that came after. Her emotions roared inside her, fear, sorrow, betrayal, but also a reluctant empathy. She understood, in a quiet corner of her mind, that he had not intended to hurt her. He had tried to protect both of them in his own flawed way. Yet, understanding did not erase the peril, nor the trembling uncertainty in her heart. Love, she realized, could not survive on understanding alone. It required trust, and trust had been fractured in an instant. The room felt smaller now, shadows stretching longer as night deepened outside. Amara's hands gripped the edges of the sofa, knuckles white as she struggled to steady her breathing. She looked at Kieran, seeing the man she loved and the man whose past could upend everything. Her heart wanted to stay, to forgive, to move forward together, but her intuition screamed a warning she could not ignore. For the first time, she recognized the truth of the old saying. The moment one is told a secret that shakes the foundation of trust, it is not just the revelation itself that matters, but the choices that follow. Could she stay and risk heartbreak? Or worse, could she leave and protect herself, even if it meant abandoning the man she had begun to love? The tension in the room was almost unbearable, thick with unspoken possibilities. Amara felt as though time had slowed, each heartbeat echoing loudly in her chest. She knew that the next moments would define her path, shaping not just her relationship, but her understanding of love, trust, and self-preservation. And so, with a deep breath, she forced herself to listen. To absorb every word, every nuance, every confession and omission. She braced for the storm that had quietly been gathering beneath the calm she had cherished. Kieran's secret had been revealed, and with it, a new reality had emerged. A reality where nothing could remain the same, where every choice carried weight, and where the calm she had known would soon give way to a tempest. The days after Kieran's confession passed in a blur of unease. Amara tried to carry on as usual, going to work, meeting friends, laughing at small jokes, but the secret lingered like a shadow she couldn't shake. Every glance, every message, every word he spoke was now filtered through a lens of doubt. She wanted to believe that what he had told her was behind them, that their shared moments could heal the rift, but her intuition whispered warnings she could no longer ignore. At first it was subtle. Kieran became quieter, more guarded. He no longer shared the little details of his day with the same ease, and when she asked about his past or his plans, he would deflect with gentle vagueness, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Sometimes he laughed at her questions as if to brush them off, but the laughter sounded hollow, distant, leaving a cold echo in its wake. Amara noticed the inconsistencies first in small ways. He claimed to be busy with work, yet she would see him out at a cafe or meeting someone she hadn't been introduced to. A text he forgot to send, a call he left unanswered. Each incident was minor alone, but together they began to form a pattern she couldn't ignore. Her mind raced. Was he hiding something more? Was his past reaching into her present in ways she could not yet see? Friends began to notice her tension. Over coffee, her best friend, Layla, leaned forward, concern etched across her face. Amara, you've changed. You seem on edge all the time. Is it him? Amara shook her head, forcing a smile. No, everything's fine. I'm just stressed at work. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they were a lie. She wanted to confide in someone, to voice the fear that had nested inside her, but the shame of doubt made her hesitate. How could she admit that she was starting to mistrust someone she had just begun to love? At home, the tension between her and Kieran grew. He was still kind, still attentive in small ways, but there was a new edge to their interactions, a defensiveness she couldn't ignore. If she pressed for explanations, he would deflect, insisting that she was imagining things or reading too much into minor events. I've told you everything, he would say, but his eyes flickered away, betraying more than his words admitted. The anxiety became almost physical. Amara found herself checking her phone compulsively, noting every missed call or delayed reply. She replayed conversations in her mind, searching for hidden meanings, patterns, and half-truths. Even the simplest interactions, messages with friends, brief chats with coworkers, felt loaded, as though the world itself had shifted under the weight of Kieran's secret. And then the strange incidents began. Items she was certain she had placed on her desk went missing. Notes she had written to herself were moved. Calls came at odd hours from numbers she didn't recognize, and when she answered, there was only silence. Her heart would race, and she would hear Kieran's voice behind her, offering calm reassurances, but the unease lingered, gnawing at her trust like a persistent whisper. The unease was compounded by the fear she felt inside. Each day, Amara wrestled with her own judgment. Had she misread the signs before? Had she allowed herself to fall too quickly, ignoring instincts that were now screaming warnings? Her heart urged her to hold on, to believe in the man who had been so tender, so attentive. But her mind painted a different picture, one of half-truths, hidden motives, and danger lurking just beneath the surface. At night, she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to force herself to breathe normally. Shadows of the past crept in, memories of betrayals, of moments when trust had led her to heartbreak. Now, with Kieran's secret in the open, she felt as though she were standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to take a leap of faith or step back to safety. Every sound in the apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of a floorboard, made her startle. She felt fragile, exposed, and unsure of what she could trust. Even small gestures from Kieran, which would have once felt reassuring, now triggered doubt. A late-night text apologizing for work delays felt like a warning. A sudden smile across the room seemed rehearsed. She noticed how he sometimes avoided eye contact when certain topics came up, how he occasionally sighed as if carrying a weight he couldn't share. The man she had once admired for his honesty now seemed like a stranger, a puzzle she could not solve. Friends and family continued to voice their concern. Layla's questions grew sharper, her tone more insistent. Amara, this isn't just your imagination. You need to trust yourself. Something feels off. But loyalty to her heart made Amara hesitate. She didn't want to believe the warnings. She wanted to think that love could overcome any obstacle, that Kieran's charm and kindness were genuine, untainted by his past. But the universe seemed determined to unsettle her. Strange coincidences piled up, an unexpected meeting at a cafe, a shadowy figure seen from her window, a package delivered to the wrong address. Each incident was small, yet together they built a sense of inevitability. Something was coming, something she could not yet name, and the secret Kieran had shared seemed to be the key to understanding it. Alone in her apartment one evening, Amara finally allowed herself to confront the truth. She reviewed every moment since the revelation, every small instinct she had silenced, every time she had ignored the prickling in her chest. Slowly, she began to see the shape of reality, not the comforting version she had clung to, but a harsher, more complex truth. Trust, she realized, was no longer a simple matter of hope or desire. It was fragile, delicate, and once broken, difficult to rebuild. And yet, in the midst of suspicion, fear, and mounting anxiety, Amara also glimpsed the first sparks of strength. She realized that she could not control Kieran's past, nor could she predict every twist of his life. What she could control was herself, her choices, her instincts, her courage to face the uncertainty ahead. It was an uncomfortable truth, but a powerful one. Survival, emotionally and physically, depended on awareness, vigilance, and sometimes the willingness to let go. The descent into suspicion had begun, subtle but relentless. Each day brought new signs, new doubts, new internal conflicts. And as the tension grew, Amara felt a chilling certainty that the calm she had once known, the moments of laughter, tenderness, and trust, was no longer the reality she lived in. The storm was approaching, gathering its power, and she could sense, deep in her bones, that the next chapters of her life would demand courage she had never summoned before. The tension in Amara's life didn't fade with time. It intensified. What had begun as subtle suspicion now manifested in ways she could no longer ignore. The secret Kieran had revealed, once a shadow at the edges of her mind, had begun to ripple outward, touching corners of her life she had thought safe. It started quietly. At work, colleagues who had once been friendly began to whisper in hushed tones when she passed by. She overheard fragments of conversations, words like complicated and dangerous hanging in the air like smoke. She wasn't sure if they were talking about her or Kieran, but the anxiety gnawed at her. Every glance from a coworker felt loaded, every message she received made her pause. Even minor mistakes at work, which she normally brushed off, now felt amplified, as though her life were teetering on the edge of scrutiny and judgment. Social life offered no escape. Friends, who had once been her refuge, now approached with a mix of concern and caution. Invitations dwindled. Messages went unanswered. Amara felt herself shrinking, retreating into the safety of her apartment. The once vibrant spaces where she laughed and shared were now heavy with the weight of worry. She began to feel isolated, alone in a world that suddenly seemed more dangerous than she could have imagined. Kieran tried to reach her, to offer reassurance. "It's just people misunderstanding," he said one evening, his voice soft but firm, eyes seeking hers. "They don't know the full story. We'll get through this." But his words rang hollow to her ears. The defensiveness he carried, the careful way he chose each phrase, now felt like a mask, a shield to hide truths he hadn't yet shared, or truths she wasn't ready to face. The small tendernesses that had once drawn her in, the touches, the quiet smiles, were now tinged with doubt. Every interaction became a test of trust, and every answer seemed to create more questions. Sleep, once a comfort, became a battlefield. Amara found herself lying awake for hours, replaying the past weeks in her mind. She analyzed every word, every glance, every gesture. Anxiety gnawed at her chest and insomnia made her body ache. Her dreams were no longer restful. They were fractured, filled with shadows and warnings she couldn't decipher. She woke with a racing heart, the echo of Kieran's secret lingering like a storm cloud, and the realization that her life was now entwined with uncertainty and potential danger. The psychological strain became heavier with each passing day. Doubt had become a constant companion, whispering that she had misjudged the man she had grown to care for. Anger surged unbidden at the thought of being deceived, mingling with grief for the trust she had invested and regret that she hadn't left when her intuition first whispered warnings. At times, she found herself staring at Kieran, questioning if the person before her was the same man she thought she knew. The duality of love and fear battled within her, a storm that left her emotionally raw and unsteady. Then came the moments that could not be ignored. A note slipped under her door and signed, containing a warning that made her blood run cold. She received a call late at night from a number she didn't recognize, and when she answered, there was only silence at the other end. An envelope containing a photograph of her apartment, taken from outside, arrived at her workplace. Each event was small enough to seem like coincidence, but together they formed a pattern she could not dismiss. She confronted Kieran, her voice shaking but firm. "Do you know anything about this?" she demanded, holding up the photograph. Her hands trembled, not from fear of him, but from fear of the reality she was now living. Kieran's eyes widened and he reached for her, but she stepped back. "Amara, he began, but she cut him off. "Don't. I need the truth. I need everything." He hesitated, the conflict plain in his eyes. I didn't send those," he admitted, voice low. "But yes, there are people from my past, complications. I wanted to protect you, I swear. I didn't know it would reach you like this." Amara felt a shiver run down her spine. The secrecy, the half-truths, the unknown threats, they were no longer abstract. They were tangible, pressing on her daily life with a weight that was almost unbearable. The very world she had built around herself, her work, her friends, her sense of security, was now infiltrated by the shadows of Kieran's secret. The strain was not just external, it was internal, gnawing at her sense of self. She began to question her own judgment, wondering if she had been foolish to let herself love, to let herself hope. Could she have seen the warning signs? Could she have protected herself? Each question spiraled, leaving her emotionally exhausted and uncertain. Even Kieran's attempts at explanation, at reassurance, were double-edged. They soothed her briefly, allowing a fragile moment of hope to bloom, only for her doubts to return with twice the force. Love and mistrust existed side by side, a volatile mix that left her heart racing and her mind spinning. She wanted to believe him, to anchor herself in the man she had fallen for, but reality reminded her constantly that the storm of consequences was real and growing. Amara began to recognize the profound cost of secrets. A single revelation could ripple outward, changing lives in ways unimaginable. And though she felt fear, grief, and anger, a small ember of resolve also burned within her. She could not control Kieran's past or the actions of others, but she could control how she responded. She could face the consequences head-on, even if it meant stepping into uncertainty. By the time night fell again, Amara was exhausted in body and mind. The apartment felt smaller, the walls closing in, shadows deepening as if aware of her turmoil. She stared out the window, the city lights blurred by the weight of her thoughts. She knew the first real consequence of Kieran's secret had arrived, not as a distant threat, but as a living, breathing challenge to her trust, her relationships, and her own strength. And yet, amidst the fear and confusion, there was clarity. The calm she had cherished was gone. The life she had known, though briefly beautiful, had shifted irrevocably. The storm was no longer approaching. It was here, and she had to navigate it with courage, wisdom, and a readiness to make choices that could change everything. In the quiet moments before sleep, Amara understood. The path ahead would demand resilience. The secret was no longer a word or a memory, it had become a force, tangible and relentless, that would test her heart, her mind, and her capacity to survive the truth. And in that understanding, a small spark of determination lit within her, reminding her that though the storm raged around her, she still had the power to decide whether it would consume her, or whether she would rise above it. The tension that had been building for weeks erupted suddenly, like a storm breaking over calm seas. Amara woke to a sharp knock at her apartment door in the early hours, a noise so urgent it jolted her from a half-sleep. Her heart raced before she even opened her eyes. The air felt heavier, the shadows darker, the familiar walls of her apartment suddenly foreign. Something had shifted, and she knew instinctively that this was no ordinary moment. Kieran was already there, pacing near the door, his phone clutched tightly in one hand. The look on his face was unreadable, part fear, part urgency, part shame. "Amara, you need to see this," he said, his voice low and tight. She could sense the gravity in his tone, a tremor she had never heard before. Before she could respond, he handed her the phone. On the screen was a message thread she hadn't seen before, threatening messages from someone claiming to know Kieran's past, warning her to stay away from him. The words were direct, chilling. "If you don't leave him, you'll regret it." Her breath caught in her throat. Every instinct screamed danger, a warning she had tried to ignore, now undeniable. The emotional impact hit her like a freight train. Fear, confusion, anger, and betrayal collided in a wave that left her momentarily frozen. She stared at Kieran, the man she had started to love, and simultaneously at the reality she had been avoiding. "Why didn't you tell me this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "All of this, all of the danger, and you never warned me?" Kieran's eyes softened, filled with a mixture of guilt and helplessness. "I wanted to protect you, Amara. I didn't know it would escalate like this. I thought I could handle it on my own," he admitted. "I thought I was keeping you safe." Amara felt her chest tighten. She wanted to believe him, wanted to forgive him as she had in the past, but the fear was real, tangible, and immediate. She thought of all the small incidents that had already unnerved her, the misplaced notes, the strange calls, the watchful glances of unknown figures outside her apartment. The secret he had revealed, once abstract, was now concrete. And it was dangerous. She could feel the emotional tug-of-war within herself. Her heart urged her to stay, to believe in the man she had come to trust, to cling to the moments of tenderness that had once seemed so safe. But her intuition screamed otherwise, warning her that staying could cost her more than heartbreak. It could threaten her very sense of security. She remembered the late nights alone, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the city, feeling the creeping anxiety that had become a constant companion. Memories of Kieran's subtle evasions surfaced, small deflections, hesitant answers, averted eyes, and now they carried a new weight. They were no longer minor inconsistencies. They were pieces of a larger picture, hints that he had lived with danger long before she had entered his life. Her emotions shifted from anger to sorrow to fear, cycling rapidly, leaving her dizzy and uncertain. And then the catalyst struck. A loud crash from the kitchen made her jump, and when she cautiously approached, she saw the front window ajar, curtains fluttering in the cold night air. A package lay on the floor, its contents exposed. Photos of her in her apartment, her personal space violated. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Someone had been watching her, using Kieran's secret to reach her. The danger was no longer abstract. It was here. It was real. Her emotional climax surged in a flood of heartbreak, fury, and fear. Tears welled in her eyes, but they were joined by a fierce clarity. She recognized with painful certainty that love alone could not shield her from this threat. Trust could no longer be assumed, it had to be actively protected. And as much as she cared for Kieran, she could not ignore her own survival. Kieran reached for her, desperate to offer comfort, but Amara pulled back. "No," she said firmly, her voice steadier than she expected. "I need to think. I need to know that I can protect myself. This isn't just your secret anymore. It's mine now too, and I can't ignore it." The room was charged with tension, every word, every glance heavy with unspoken consequences. She felt the weight of weeks of emotional strain and danger pressing down on her, threatening to crush her resolve. Yet within the pressure, a spark of determination flared. She had been tested before, and though this was far more dangerous, she also knew she had the strength to make the choice that was right for her. The decision was clear, even if the path was not easy. She could forgive, try to move forward, and risk further exposure to danger and emotional pain, or she could step away, reclaiming her independence and safety, even if it meant leaving behind the love she had begun to cherish. The room seemed to shrink around her as she wrestled with the choice, each heartbeat a drum of urgency and consequence. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Staying could mean facing threats she wasn't equipped to handle, losing herself in a world built on secrets and half-truths. Leaving could mean heartbreak, loneliness, and the shattering of a dream she had just allowed herself to believe in. The stakes were high, the consequences immediate, and every instinct in her body screamed a warning she could not ignore. Kieran's voice broke through the storm of her thoughts. Amara, whatever you decide, I'll accept it. Just, please don't leave thinking I don't care. His eyes searched hers, pleading, vulnerable. She saw the man she loved there, but the danger surrounding him, and now surrounding her, could not be denied. She took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the weight of the world pressing on her chest, the echo of the secret and the threats now fully realized. Her emotions were raw: fear, sorrow, love, anger, but clarity had begun to form amid the chaos. She realized that true courage was not in clinging blindly to love, but in facing the storm head-on and making a choice that honored her own strength and survival. The breaking point had arrived. The quiet life she had cherished, the calm before the storm, had been swept away. In its place was a moment of reckoning, a decision that would define her heart, her trust, and her sense of self. Amara's hands trembled slightly, but her eyes were steady as she looked at Kieran. She would have to choose, and in that choice she would discover the depth of her courage, the resilience of her heart, and the limits of trust. And in that room, with the night pressing in around them, she understood something profoundly simple yet terrifying. Some secrets cannot remain buried, some truths cannot be ignored, and sometimes, love alone is not enough to save you from the consequences of what has been hidden. The apartment felt colder than usual that morning, though the sun had begun to rise, spilling light across the floor. Amara sat on the edge of her bed, her hands gripping the sheets as though they could anchor her in the storm that had overtaken her life. The events of the past days, the secrets, the threats, the growing unease, had left her exhausted mentally and emotionally. Her heart still ached for Kieran, yet a stronger, sharper voice inside her demanded clarity, demanded action. Kieran arrived shortly after, a mixture of concern and apology etched across his face. "Amara," he began, "I know things have been overwhelming, but we can face this together." She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in days. The man she loved was there, and yet so much of him now belonged to a past she could not access. There was no malice in his eyes, only fear, guilt, and a desperate hope that she would forgive and remain. But she could no longer ignore the reality. The secret he had revealed was not a shadow confined to him. It had already reached her, touched her life, and made her vulnerable in ways she had never imagined. Her mind raced. Every instinct she had sharpened over the past weeks screamed a warning. She could not stay without risking more than her heart. Yet her emotions were tangled in the man she had begun to care for, in the love she had allowed herself to feel despite the warnings, despite the danger. She realized that the choice before her was not simple. It was survival versus desire, reason versus emotion, safety versus love. The first option, escape, presented itself with clarity. She could walk out of the apartment, leave Kieran, and reclaim her independence. She could protect herself from the hidden threats that had crept into her life. It would be painful, yes, heartbreaking, but necessary. And in that choice, she could preserve herself, her sense of security, and her own self-respect. The second option, confrontation, was riskier. It meant staying, facing Kieran directly about the full consequences of his secret, and demanding honesty that could either heal or shatter them further. It meant exposing herself emotionally, opening herself fully to him again, and risking the vulnerability that had already been tested. And yet, part of her longed for this. The possibility of understanding, of reclaiming some sense of control over the chaos that had invaded her life. Amara finally rose, her movements deliberate. She walked toward Kieran, each step heavy with the weight of choice. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady, though her heart thundered in her chest. He nodded, relief mingled with anxiety. "Yes, anything. I'll tell you everything." They sat at the kitchen table, a small space between them filled with tension, unspoken fears, and the lingering weight of the secret. Amara's eyes were fixed on him. "Every detail. Every consequence. No more omissions. I need to know what I'm facing. If I'm staying, if I'm leaving, I need to know the full truth." Kieran exhaled slowly, then began to speak, outlining the events, the people, the hidden dangers he had never shared. His words were raw, filled with regret and urgency. As he spoke, Amara felt a wave of emotion. Sorrow for the man she loved, fear for the unknown threats, and anger for the secrecy that had already cost her peace. Every detail added clarity, but also confirmed her instincts. The storm they faced was real. She listened, absorbing each revelation, each hidden truth. And as she processed it, her choice crystallized. She could no longer remain passive. She had to act decisively to reclaim control over her life. She could forgive, yes, but forgiveness would not mean ignoring danger or sacrificing herself. She would act from strength, not blind love. Amara stood, her posture straight, her voice firm. "I'm leaving," she said, the words both freeing and painful. Kieran's eyes widened, pleading, but she did not waver. "This isn't because I don't care," she continued. "It's because I must protect myself. I cannot let the past, your past, put me in harm's way. I can't risk it, nor can I risk losing myself in the process." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Kieran reached out, but she gently, firmly stepped back. There was no anger in her face, only resolve, clarity, and a recognition that her heart, though tender, was not fragile enough to ignore danger. She gathered her essentials, her movements deliberate, as though each action reinforced her newfound independence. Every step toward the door was a step toward reclaiming herself, her life, and her dignity. Kieran followed, his expression a mixture of helplessness and sorrow. "I understand," he said softly. "I just wish things could be different." Amara paused at the threshold, turning to face him one last time. "They could be," she replied quietly, "but we can't rewrite the past. I hope you find a way to make peace with yours, Kieran. And I hope you stay safe, truly safe." Then she stepped out, the door closing behind her with a sense of finality that echoed in her chest. The air outside felt crisp, grounding, and alive. She breathed deeply, feeling the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. The city, once threatening in its blur of lights and shadows, now seemed full of possibility. She was alone, but free. The confrontation had done its work too. Kieran's eyes followed her from the apartment window as she walked away, a silent acknowledgement that trust had been broken, but that clarity had been achieved. Both of them were left to navigate the aftermath of secrets, revelations, and choices, separate, yet forever changed by the storm they had weathered together. As Amara walked through the streets, the morning sun warm on her face, she realized the true weight of her decision. Freedom did not erase the love she had felt, nor the heartbreak that followed, but it allowed her to reclaim agency over her own life. She was no longer a passive participant in the chaos of someone else's past. She was active, empowered, aware. In the solitude that followed, Amara understood a vital truth. Strength was not in clinging blindly to love, but in facing reality, listening to her instincts and taking action, even when the choice was painful. Forgiveness could come later, if it came at all. Survival and self-respect were immediate, non-negotiable imperatives. And though her heart ached for the man she had loved, a quiet sense of peace settled within her. She had acted from clarity, not fear. She had chosen herself. The danger remained, yes, but she would meet it with awareness, courage, and the hard-earned strength of someone who had survived betrayal and emerged stronger. The storm had passed in one form, but the lessons it left behind would linger, shaping every choice she would make in the future. The confrontation had ended, the escape had been made, and Amara walked forward with a heart that was both wounded and resolute, a heart ready to face whatever came next. The weeks following Amara's departure from Kieran's apartment were quiet, but not peaceful. Silence had replaced the chaos, yet it carried its own weight. The adrenaline of crisis had faded, leaving her with the raw reality of what she had endured, the betrayal, the danger, and the heartbreak. For the first time in a long while, she felt the full consequences of the storm she had survived. Her apartment felt different now, more like her own sanctuary than it had in months. She rearranged her furniture, lit candles in the evening, and allowed herself small comforts she had neglected. A favorite book, the soft warmth of her blanket, the smell of fresh coffee in the morning. Each action was deliberate, a reminder that she was reclaiming not just her space but her life. Work remained a challenge. Rumors and whispers still lingered, though now they seemed distant, almost irrelevant. Amara held her head high, responding with professionalism, letting her focus on the tasks before her rather than the chatter of colleagues. She realized that part of recovery was choosing what to let matter and what to ignore, a lesson Kieran's secret had forced upon her. Emotionally, the recovery was less straightforward. At night, she sometimes relived the moments of fear, the tension, the uncertainty. She thought of Kieran, not with anger exactly, but with a complex mixture of sorrow and longing. Her mind replayed their conversations, his confessions, the tender gestures that had once drawn her in. Even now, she could feel the echo of love, faint but undeniable. And yet, with each flashback came clarity. She could remember the fear, the anxiety, the threats. She reminded herself of the strength it had taken to leave, the courage in choosing herself over uncertainty. Those moments of remembrance were painful, but they were also affirmations of growth. She had survived, not untouched, but stronger, more aware, more resilient. Friends became her anchor. Layla, who had worried endlessly, now offered quiet companionship rather than probing questions. "You're different," Layla said one afternoon, handing her a cup of tea. "You seem lighter somehow. Stronger." Amara smiled, a small but genuine smile. "I feel it," she admitted. "The fear is still there sometimes, but it doesn't control me anymore. I've realized that some storms don't break you, they show you what you're made of." Even in moments of solitude, she found strength. She would go for long walks in the evenings, listening to the rhythm of the city and the beating of her own heart. Each step became a metaphor, a declaration that she was moving forward, not backward. The past had shaped her, but it would not define her. There were lingering doubts, of course. Occasionally she would wonder about Kieran, where he was, whether he had faced the consequences of his choices, whether he had learned from the mistakes that had nearly cost them both so dearly. These thoughts sometimes brought a pang of sadness, but they no longer held the power to destabilize her. They were distant echoes, reminders of lessons learned rather than chains that bound her. Amara began to explore aspects of herself that had been neglected during the storm. She revisited old hobbies, immersed herself in her passions, and even considered new opportunities for growth. She realized that survival was not just about avoiding danger, it was about reclaiming joy, curiosity, and hope. Her life, once disrupted by secrecy and mistrust, was slowly taking shape again, infused with intention and self-respect. In the quiet moments of reflection, she understood the true impact of Kieran's secret, not just on her relationship but on herself. She had learned that trust was precious, fragile, and non-negotiable. She had learned that intuition, often dismissed as doubt, was a guide that demanded attention. And she had learned that self-respect and survival sometimes required choices that broke her heart, but ultimately preserved her soul. Some days she allowed herself to feel the heartbreak fully, to mourn the love that had been real, even if it had been fraught with danger. Tears came unbidden, but they were healing, not destructive. She let herself sit with the grief, knowing that acknowledgement was part of moving forward. Each tear shed was a cleansing, a release of what could not be reclaimed. Other days she celebrated her resilience. She reveled in small victories, a productive day at work, a quiet evening spent reading, a conversation with a friend that made her laugh. She noticed how much lighter she felt when she focused on what she could control, her actions, her choices, her emotions, rather than the unpredictable consequences of someone else's past. The aftermath was also a time of reflection. Amara considered the lessons she had learned about love, trust, and boundaries. She realized that love without honesty and safety was dangerous, and that forgiveness, while noble, must never come at the expense of self-preservation. These insights, though hard-earned, were gifts she could carry forward into all her future relationships and endeavors. She also recognized the value of courage. Leaving Kieran had not been easy, she had felt the full weight of heartbreak and longing, but in doing so she had reclaimed her agency. She had shown herself that strength did not always come from confrontation or heroics. Sometimes it came from simply choosing oneself in moments of danger and uncertainty. Over time, Amara's life began to take on a sense of normalcy again, though normal now carried a new meaning. It was not the innocence of ignorance but the clarity of awareness. She had navigated the storm, faced consequences, and emerged with a deeper understanding of who she was and what she valued. The quiet, thoughtful moments of her day became her sanctuary, as much as the bustling, social moments reminded her that the world continued to turn. And though memories of Kieran occasionally surfaced, his smile, his voice, the tender moments they had shared, they no longer held power over her choices. She could remember, feel, and learn from the past without being consumed by it. She had emerged whole, not untouched, but undeniably stronger. In the evenings, as she stood at her window watching the city lights flicker, she felt a quiet sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons, for the clarity, for the resilience she had discovered within herself. She understood that life would always hold surprises, some dangerous, some beautiful, but she was equipped now to face them with courage, insight, and a steady heart. Amara's journey through the aftermath was not linear. There were moments of doubt, moments of fear, and moments of longing. Yet each of these moments was balanced by reflection, growth, and the quiet power of self-awareness. She had survived the consequences of secrecy and danger, and in doing so, she had learned that the most profound strength often comes not from others, but from the depths of one's own heart. And as she prepared for each new day, Amara felt an inner confidence that had been absent before. The storm had passed, but the lessons remained, shaping her perspective on love, trust, and the importance of listening to her instincts. She knew now that the future could hold uncertainty, but it could also hold hope, clarity, and the promise of a life rebuilt on her terms. The city was quiet that evening, the soft glow of streetlights painting gold across the pavements. Amara stood at her apartment window, gazing down at the life that had continued without her intervention, yet had been irrevocably shaped by her choices. The hum of distant traffic was steady, a reminder that the world moved on even when hearts were bruised and secrets revealed. She thought back to the beginning, to the calm before the storm, the moments when life had seemed simple, the laughter shared with Kieran, the tender glances, and the quiet dreams they had whispered to each other. At the time, she had believed in a future built on love and trust. But she had learned that love, however beautiful, could be fragile, and that trust, once broken, required more than words to rebuild. Her mind drifted through the weeks of fear, doubt, and uncertainty, the nights of insomnia, the whispered threats, the moments of creeping anxiety that had made her question herself. She remembered the photographs slipped under her door, the phone calls that ended in silence, the package that had left her apartment feeling violated. Each memory carried its own weight, yet none of it broke her. Instead, it had shaped her, revealing a resilience she had not fully recognized before. Amara reflected on Kieran, not with bitterness but with understanding. He had been a man burdened by secrets and danger, someone who had loved her but had failed to protect both himself and her in ways that truly mattered. She felt sorrow for what could have been, for the moments of tenderness that had been overshadowed by hidden truths. But she also understood that his choices were his own, and she could not carry the burden of his past any longer. Forgiveness, she realized, was not about forgetting, it was about freeing herself. The most profound lesson she realized was the importance of intuition. Every small warning, every fleeting doubt had been a whisper of truth. She had learned to listen, to trust the instincts that had once seemed inconvenient or even unwarranted. That inner voice had guided her to safety, had allowed her to protect herself without sacrificing her heart entirely. She now understood that intuition was not fear, it was wisdom in disguise, a tool for survival, clarity, and self-respect. Amara's reflections also turned inward, toward the person she had become. She had emerged stronger, tempered by experience, yet more compassionate and aware. She could feel her own growth in the small decisions she made every day, how she approached her work, how she navigated relationships, how she allowed herself moments of joy without guilt or hesitation. Strength, she understood, was not merely about enduring hardship. It was about embracing it, learning from it, and moving forward with intention. Even as the danger from Kieran's secret faded into the background of her life, its lessons remained vivid. She realized that love, trust, and vulnerability were gifts, but they were not guarantees. They required discernment, courage, and sometimes the willingness to walk away when circumstances threatened one's safety or integrity. These truths were etched into her heart, reminders that life's beauty and peril often existed side by side. Occasionally, she allowed herself to think of Kieran, to wonder if he had faced the consequences of his choices, if he had grown as she had. But she did not dwell. There was no need for bitterness, no space for regret beyond the acknowledgement that her choice had been necessary. In her heart, she carried both sorrow and gratitude, the sorrow for what had been lost and gratitude for the clarity and strength she had gained. She smiled faintly as she remembered the moments of tenderness they had shared, the laughter, the quiet evenings together. Those memories were not tainted. They were proof that beauty existed even amid uncertainty and danger. They reminded her that life was complex, that love could be both wondrous and perilous, and that courage was sometimes the act of letting go rather than holding on. Amara's reflection deepened into a broader perspective. She considered the people she had met, the experiences she had had, and the choices she had made. She understood that life was not simply about avoiding pain or seeking comfort. It was about navigating challenges, embracing lessons, and forging a path that aligned with one's values. Her growth was not merely survival, it was self-discovery, an awakening to the depth of her own heart and the limits of trust and love. She thought about the quiet moments, the small joys that had returned to her life, the warmth of the morning sun, the comfort of friends who had stood by her, the satisfaction of work completed with pride and focus. These moments were simple yet profound, affirming that life could be rebuilt after upheaval. They were proof that healing was possible, that the heart could mend without erasing its experiences, and that resilience was both earned and innate. Amara also acknowledged her vulnerability. She did not pretend to be invincible, nor did she deny the scars that lingered. But she had learned to honor them, to see them as reminders of strength rather than symbols of weakness. She understood now that true empowerment came from awareness, choice, and the courage to act when the moment demanded it. Her gaze returned to the city below, the lights twinkling like distant stars. The world had continued moving while she had faced her storm, and she felt a sense of connection to it. A reminder that life, despite its challenges, was persistent, resilient, and full of possibility. She had emerged from the storm not untouched, but transformed. Her heart was still tender, yet fortified. Her trust was cautious, yet capable of love. Her soul had been tested, and it had endured. Finally, she allowed herself one last thought on Kieran, not as a man she would pursue again, but as a part of her story, a catalyst for growth and self-awareness. She could carry the memories without being trapped by them, and she could step forward into life with clarity, confidence, and the lessons she had earned through fire and fear. Amara turned from the window, the city now behind her, metaphorically and literally. She felt a quiet empowerment settle over her, a calm born not of ignorance but of understanding. She had faced betrayal, danger, and heartbreak. She had chosen herself, made hard decisions, and lived through the storm. And though life would continue to hold uncertainties, she now understood that she had the strength, wisdom, and resilience to face them with her head held high. As she moved through her apartment, the quiet hum of life around her, Amara smiled. It was a smile of survival, of understanding, of hope. The storm had ended, but its lessons would remain with her forever, guiding her, shaping her, reminding her of her own power. Love and danger, trust and betrayal, heartbreak and growth, all had left their mark, and she carried each with dignity and clarity. And in that quiet, reflective moment, she whispered to herself a truth she had learned through the fire of experience. Some storms reveal not what we lose, but what we are truly capable of becoming.